Raphael painted portrait of a young man sometime around 1513 to 1514, and for centuries it hung in the Czartoryski collection in Krakow alongside Leonardo's Lady with an Arm. Scholars believe the statue may have been a self-portrait, though that debate was never fully settled. What was settled was its value. Art historians ranked it among the finest examples of high Renaissance portraiture in existence, a work that belonged in the same conversation as anything hanging in the Uffizi or the Louvre. That painting is one of 5 we are covering today. 5 masterpieces that walked into the chaos of World War II and never walked out. Stay with me through every story, and if this is the kind of history that keeps you up at night the way it keeps me up, consider subscribing. We go this deep every single time. When Germany invaded Poland in September 1939, Nazi art plunderers moved with unusual speed on the Czartoryski collection. Hans Frank, the Governor General of occupied Poland, personally seized the painting and hung it in his private residence. Berlin soon took notice. The portrait had been earmarked for the Führer Museum, Hitler's planned mega museum in Linz, Austria, a project he envisioned as the cultural crown of the Third Reich. The fact that this specific painting was flagged for that collection tells you everything about how highly it was regarded. By 1945, with Soviet forces closing in from the east, German officials began evacuating looted treasures into the Silesian mountains in present-day Poland and Germany. The portrait entered that chaos and never came out. No credible sighting and no paper trail pointing to a transfer or destruction. Investigators after the war reconstructed the evacuation routes but hit dead ends at every turn. The painting's last known location is somewhere in the mountain corridor, and after 8 decades of searching, it remains exactly there, which is nowhere. The Amber Room was not a painting or a sculpture. It was an entire chamber built in the early 18th century for the Prussian royal palace and later gifted to Peter the Great. Its walls were composed of 6 tons of intricately carved amber panels, gold leaf, and mosaic mirrors spanning over 180 square feet. Catherine the Great expanded it further at the Catherine Palace in Czarskoye Selo outside St. Petersburg, where it stayed for nearly 2 centuries. When Nazi Germany invaded the Soviet Union in 1941, the Soviets tried to dismantle and hide it, but the amber had fused to the walls and began cracking. They covered it in wallpaper and hoped for the best. It took the German 58th Infantry Division just 36 hours to strip it entirely. What followed was not looting in any casual sense. German soldiers catalogued, created, and shipped the panels with the precision of a removal company. 27 crates in total arrived at Königsberg Castle in what is now Kaliningrad, Russia, where the room was reassembled and briefly displayed. Eyewitnesses, including castle staff and local officials, later described watching those same crates being moved again in late 1944 as Allied bombing intensified. Carried out in the tunnel system beneath the castle and into the surrounding network of underground passages the city had built over centuries. After the war, Soviet investigators interviewed survivors and traced the crate movement to several possible locations: the castle tunnels, a nearby bunker, a ship called Wilhelm Gustloff that was sunk in the Baltic. Modern excavations using ground-penetrating radar and sonar scanning have been conducted across Kaliningrad, targeting tunnel sections that have never been fully explored. Each scan finds cavities, seal chambers, and underground voids, and each excavation finds them empty. The crypts moved through the city and dissolved into the underground geography without leaving anything behind that anyone has been able to reach. Gustav Klimt spent nearly a decade from 1895 painting 3 monumental works commissioned by the University of Vienna, which were philosophy, medicine, and jurisprudence. Each canvas ran roughly 4 meters tall. When they were exhibited, they caused an immediate scandal. University professors objected to their symbolism, their eroticism, and their rejection of Enlightenment idealism. The Australian government eventually cancelled the commission, and Klimt bought the paintings back himself. They passed through private hands and ended up stored at Schloss Immendorf, a castle in Lower Austria, where dozens of artworks had been moved for safekeeping away from Allied bombing raids targeting Vienna. In May 1944, retreating SS forces set fire to Schloss Immendorf. The historical record is clear that the burning was deliberate. Troops torched the castle to prevent its contents from falling into Allied hands as Soviet forces swept through the region. All 3 university paintings were inside. They burnt completely. Of everything stored at the Immendorf that day, Klimt's 3 canvases represent the single most significant culture loss, not just because of their size, but because they documented a pivotal and deeply controversial chapter in the history of modern art that no other works can replace. What survives are black and white photographs taken before the war, a small number of preparatory sketches, and partial documentation from the original Vienna exhibitions. In recent years, researchers and digital artists have used colorization tools and cross-referenced Klimt's known color palette from surviving works to reconstruct approximate versions of all 3 paintings. The results are informed and technically careful, but they are still interpretations built from absence. No photograph captured the full detail of those canvases, which means the reconstructions are as much educated guesswork as they are restoration. Berlin in the final years of the war held an extraordinary concentration of privately owned art, collected over decades by wealthy industrialists, Jewish families, and aristocratic households who had little reason before 1933 to document what they owned in any formal capacity. Among the confirmed losses are works attributed to Gustav Courbet and Vincent van Gogh, pieces that had been in private hands long enough that their ownership history existed mostly in family memory rather than institutional records. When Allied bombing campaigns intensified through 1943 and 1944, and when Nazi confiscation of Jewish-owned property ran parallel to that destruction, entire collections disappeared without a single photograph or insurance document to prove they had ever existed. That absence of paperwork is what makes this category of loss uniquely difficult to address. Public museums kept inventories. Private collectors often did not, especially Jewish families who had been systematically stripped of their property under the Nuremberg laws and had neither the legal standing nor the safety to file formal records. Researchers at the German Lost Art Foundation and similar organizations have spent years working from estate letters, dealer correspondence, and auction house ledgers to reconstruct what existed. The gaps in those reconstructions are enormous, and for every work that gets named, there are likely dozens that were never named at all. In recent years, several legal cases moving through German and Dutch courts involve rediscovered fragments that provenance researchers believe may connect to larger missing pieces from Berlin collections. The legal battles center on chain of ownership and whether current holders acquired the work in good faith. What makes these cases significant beyond the individual outcomes is what they suggest, that some portion of what was believed destroyed may have instead been hidden, divided, or quietly moved through the post-war art market. Each fragment that surfaces reopens the question of how much more is still out there, sitting in a private collection somewhere, completely undocumented. Thank you for watching. Until the next one.